It was getting dark outside when Lamar, a young man with a rich past and confused thoughts, drove the last few miles along the narrow road leading to his grandmother's house. He was not one of those who often returned to his small homeland, and to be honest, there had long been a gap between him and his family of unspoken resentments and evasive, formal congratulations for the holidays. But something drew him here now. Maybe it was a sense of duty to his grandmother, who raised him when his mother was missing at work and his father was always on other people's horizons. Lamar knew that at least Grandma Estelle would be glad to see him. This thought warmed memories in my soul and gave me hope that everything would go smoothly. He parked in front of an old wooden house surrounded by a garden that had once been his grandmother's pride. The house stood in the same silence as before, and warm lights burned in the windows, as if inviting him back to the life he had been estranged from for so long. His heart was pounding with nerves and excitement, but he stepped forward, determined to spend a few days away from the hustle and bustle, relax and, perhaps, remember what a real family is. Lamar had barely knocked when the door opened and his grandmother appeared in front of him. She looked beautiful, as always tall, slender, with grey hair pulled back in a neat braid, and a dazzling smile that always hugged him even from a distance. Her eyes immediately filled with tears of joy. She hugged him, clinging to him as if she was afraid that he would disappear again for many years.
"Oh, Lamar, you've come after all. And how glad I am to see you. Honestly, I thought you'd forget about your old grandmother."
Grandma, come on. I couldn't help but come. You just know, there's a lot to do in the city, you know.
They entered the house, and Lamar noted that everything remained almost as before: a cozy living room with a soft carpet, a rocking chair by the window where Grandma liked to sit in the evenings, and a lot of old photos on the walls. Grandma Estelle did not seem to have changed, only her step became a little more cautious, and her face was covered with barely noticeable wrinkles, which only added to her wisdom and dignity. Lamar felt guilty for the years he hadn't spent with her, for all the conversations that never happened, and for all the time that he couldn't get back. Grandma took care of everything. Hot dishes were already steaming on the table. She had prepared Lamar's favorite chicken stew, and there was a glass of cool lemonade next to it. She always remembered his tastes, even when he hadn't remembered his own for a long time. Lamar ate with gusto, remembering how he once ate the same dish at the same table as a boy. They hardly spoke during the meal, enjoying the silence and the warm presence of each other. When Lamar had finished, his grandmother suggested that he walk to the end of the street, to where the river roared and a small park began. Lamar, although tired from the road, did not refuse. His soul was looking for peace, and a walk under the evening sky seemed the perfect way to relieve the burden of accumulated thoughts. They walked slowly down the street, and Estelle told him about life in the area, about how everything had changed. The old neighbors had moved away, and their houses were occupied by new families, young and full of energy, not at all like the old-timers with whom she had shared so many years. And only one of her friends, Ida, remained by her side, unchanged. Like Estelle herself, they were united by a long history of friendship and support for each other when others left them.
"By the way, you will meet Ida. She was going to come over for tea tomorrow night. I told you about her, but you probably don't remember anymore."
I remember, of course. You've always mentioned her as your most loyal friend.
Estella nodded happily, and they continued on their way in silence. The night had thickened around him, and Lamar was looking at the stars, which he rarely saw in the city because of the bright lights. Here, away from the noise and light, the sky seemed endless, deep and surprisingly clear. Looking at the stars, Lamar felt the tension leave him, giving way to something long-forgotten calmness and a slight longing for the carefree days of childhood. After returning home, they said goodbye until morning, and Lamar went to his old room. Soaked in the scent of lavender, this room held so many memories. Here he once lay under the same blanket, thinking about the future, dreaming of escaping into the big world, which beckoned him with new prospects. And so, after so many years and all that he had been through, this world brought him back to his origins, to his grandmother, who was still waiting for him here, as promised. Lying in bed, Lamar thought about tomorrow. Too much has accumulated in his life, and perhaps this visit is not just a tribute to his grandmother, but a chance to review his life, try to find answers to questions that have been hovering in his head for a long time. His grandmother's friend, Ida, flashed into his thoughts as something distant and unimportant. He did not attach any importance to this tomorrow. He would just say hello, show respect, and then take care of his vacation, as planned. The night absorbed Lamar's thoughts, and he gradually fell asleep, taking with him the image of the starry sky, his grandmother's warmth, and the feeling that this house would always remain a place of peace and protection for him. Tomorrow he will start his vacation here, a vacation from himself, from everything that exhausted and deprived him of strength. The next morning Lamar woke up to the sound of birds singing and morning worries coming from the kitchen. The sun's rays shyly made their way through the thick curtains, filling the room with soft light. He stretched, enjoying the silence around him, and remembered that today his grandmother was scheduled to have a small tea with her friend Ida. She had mentioned it the day before, but it didn't seem significant to him at the time. After leaving the room, Lamar found his grandmother preparing breakfast. She was as collected and full of energy as ever, although her hands sometimes trembled slightly when she sliced bread. Lamar watched her warmly, still marveling at her fortitude and strength after all. The woman was not young, but at the same time she seemed to him tireless. Grandma made him coffee and put a plate of fried eggs and toasted toast in front of him, preparing something like a routine conversation.
Do you remember, Lamar, that Ida is coming in today? She'll like you, I'm sure. She always loved to talk about how you were a little fidget. We've been friends for a long time, and you should talk to her.
Lamar nodded, not paying much attention to his grandmother's words. He believed that all this tea was just a way to kill time for the elderly, and he himself had nothing special to do there. But not wanting to upset his grandmother, he just smiled and agreed to meet this mysterious friend, whom, according to Estella, he had known since childhood. When it was time for the meeting, Grandma sat Lamar down in the living room, and she went out into the garden to meet her friend. He had heard them talking on the porch, but had not yet seen Ida herself. Taking a deep breath, Lamar set himself up for a long conversation about old times and family tales. However, what awaited him turned out to be completely unexpected. When Estelle returned to the house with Ida, Lamar noticed that his grandmother's friend looked far from what he had imagined. Her figure, slender and toned, attracted attention, and at first glance she did not even seem to be a woman of advanced age. Ida was charming. Her skin, smooth and dark, seemed to absorb the light, and her movements were full of a kind of confident grace. She stepped into the room with a slight smile, and her calm gaze immediately caught Lamar, as if she was looking at him closely. He noticed the thin bracelets on her wrists and the large earrings that swayed slightly, giving her image a slightly more exotic look.
Well, that's what he is, an adult Lamar. It's been so many years since we've seen each other. I think the last time you were very young.
These words of hers slightly stunned him. Lamar couldn't believe that it was his grandmother's friend standing in front of him, and not someone from another time, closer to his own. She held out her hand to him, a light touch that somehow made him feel a wave of warmth. Her gaze was piercing, and when their eyes met, Lamar felt as if she could see right through him, as if she could read his thoughts, hidden fears and internal contradictions. Lamar shook her hand, forgetting caution for a moment, and Grandma, noticing how they looked at each other, smiled with some subtle pride, as if she understood more than she was saying. It all started with a light conversation. Ida asked Lamar about his life, work and the city in which he lived. With each of her questions, he felt the tension disappear, and it became easier for him to talk to her. There was something strange about her presence that calmed him down and at the same time made his heart beat faster.
Are you probably used to the noise of the big city? It's quieter here, of course, but silence is also its own world.
Yes, it's different there. There are too many people, too many sounds, and frankly, sometimes you get tired of it.
Her gaze became a little more thoughtful. She nodded as if she understood more than just his words, and for a moment there was silence between them. Lamar felt his gaze drawn back to her. Her face, framed by light grey hair, seemed calm and wise, and there was a slight smile on her lips that both calmed and kindled something new inside. Ida was a woman full of contradictions. Her age was betrayed only by some small wrinkles and silver threads in her hair, but at the same time she possessed the brightness and charm that are usually characteristic of the young. Estelle, seeing how they were talking, left them alone, deciding to do the cooking in the kitchen, giving them the opportunity to get to know each other better. Lamar barely noticed her departure. Only Ida remained in the room, and the atmosphere became a little tense, as if they both understood that something important was happening, but did not know how to express it. Ida leaned slightly towards him. Her movements were soft and measured. She seemed to read his inner state, but did not try to ask anything. She was just there, listening and making it clear that he could say whatever he wanted. After a while, Ida suggested a walk in the garden, and Lamar agreed without even thinking about it. He wanted to get to know her more, to feel her next to him and understand why he suddenly felt so comfortable in her presence. They went outside. The air was fresh and filled with the aromas of herbs. Walking through the garden, Lamar felt unusually vulnerable, as if his every step, every word now had a special meaning. He couldn't figure out where this excitement came from, but every time he looked at Ida, it only intensified this feeling.
Did you ever think that you would come back here? Sometimes we need to go back to where it all started to figure out what's really important.
I didn't think about it, but now I feel that maybe this is exactly what is needed. Everything became too complicated in my life, and I wanted to feel something real again.
She looked at him for a long time, and Lamar realized that she knew more than she was saying, that her life was also full of its trials and internal battles. There was a wisdom in her eyes that fascinated him. They continued to walk through the garden, ignoring the time, as if every moment of this meeting meant more than either of them would dare admit. As they walked back to the house, their eyes suddenly met, and Lamar felt something change inside him. He couldn't explain the feeling. It was something more than just sympathy or interest. There was a woman in front of him who could become a teacher and friend for him, could teach him to look at the world in a new way, but at the same time she seemed painfully close to him, as if she had known him all his life. When they returned, Grandma was already waiting for them in the kitchen. She noticed their gazes, but said nothing, only addressed Ida with tenderness in her voice, as if maintaining this tacit understanding between them. Ida said goodbye to Lamar, but her gaze left in him that inexplicable feeling that he could not get out of his head. When she left, Lamar sat in silence for a long time, thinking about her words, and that in this small house, in this tiny village, he suddenly met something that changed his heart. After meeting Ida, Lamar noticed that every day he spent here at his grandmother's had acquired a different rhythm, filled with unexpected expectation. Being a city dweller, accustomed to living among concrete walls and neon lights, he always felt like a stranger in a world where peace and quiet were the main thing. However, now he found something fascinating about these simple, quiet days. The way to the store, a walk along the paths by the river, a simple tea in the kitchen, everything seemed special, as if pierced with a new meaning. Ida, his grandmother's friend, fell into his soul from the first meeting. Her presence became a kind of attraction for him, from which it was impossible to escape. Lamar did not know what attracted him to her so much, and did not try to find an explanation for it. Instead, he allowed himself to feel this inexplicable attraction, which grew stronger every day. At first he found an excuse for this. They say he just wants to get to know her better, to understand her story. But the more time they spent together, the clearer it became to him that there was much more between them than just a friendly interest. Ida seemed to respond in kind. Although they both tacitly avoided talking about their strange closeness, their every look said more than words could convey. Lamar was amazed at how easily she managed to stay calm, how naturally she carried herself, as if she did not notice the tension that filled the air whenever they were alone. He began to see her more often, not because of any established arrangements, but simply because she appeared at the right moments, as if she knew when he wanted to see her. They bumped into each other by accident, and this intensified his feelings, making their meetings even more tremulous and forbidden. When Lamar noticed her in the garden at his grandmother's house, he couldn't help but smile. It seemed that Ida could have stood there for hours, watching the flowers or picking through the dry leaves, but when her gaze rested on him, something inside came to life. She always looked calm, as if she didn't notice his gaze, but still sometimes gave him such a piercing look that he felt uncomfortable, not knowing how to justify his own feelings. Her soft smile, her demeanor, all this firmly captured him, and without realizing it, he waited for every new day just to see her again. They often found themselves together on morning walks or at evening gatherings at Grandma's kitchen. Ida became for him like a secret magnet that haunted him. In every movement she made, every glance she cast in his direction, he found a certain mystery that fascinated him more and more. It wasn't just sympathy, it was a desire to get to know her completely, to touch what was hidden behind her impassive expression. He couldn't understand how someone living in such silence and solitude could remain so mysterious and attractive. Lamar began to pay more attention to his appearance, although he tried to convince himself that it was an accident. He pretended not to care about his clothes, hairstyle, or voice, but deep down he knew he wanted to impress her. Every time he met with Ada, he tried to look at ease without showing his feelings. However, she seemed to feel it all unmistakably, as if she saw through him. He couldn't escape these thoughts, they had become an integral part of his time here. Ida appeared in his thoughts, not just as a woman, she embodied something more than the image of an attractive person. She became his guide to a world he would never have immersed himself in. Her outlook on life was both light and deep. Her stories are always full of warm wisdom, but not pretentious. She knew how to inspire and not try to teach. Each of her stories became a lesson for him that did not require answers. Listening to her, he gradually realized how much his world was different from the world in which Ida lived, but at the same time he found amazing similarities in their inner desire for freedom and understanding. Sometimes, watching her in the garden, Lamar noticed how easily she discarded any seriousness. She could sit deep in thought, and after a moment a smile would light up her face. With age, she gained the ability to enjoy the little things, and Lamar, on the contrary, was lost for a long time in search of something more. It was this feeling of peaceful contemplation of life that emanated from Ida that attracted him like magnets attract iron. She was the epitome of calm and vitality, which Lamar, accustomed to the hustle and bustle, felt like a breath of fresh air. Every day he became more dependent on her presence. His infatuation grew despite all the sound arguments and internal prohibitions. It was something uncontrollable, as if nature itself told him that this path was inevitable, that he should come to this, even if the consequences might be difficult. He was aware that these feelings were leading him into an inevitable conflict with himself, because he had never experienced anything like this before. Lamar also noticed that Ida behaved with a certain caution, as if she understood his feelings but did not allow herself to succumb to them. She kept a small distance between them, reminding him that all this was just a beautiful illusion, short-lived and perhaps doomed to break. But even so, he still felt his inner barrier breaking down, as his heart continued to reach out to her, filling his life with new meaning. Each of their meetings became a small celebration filled with hidden meaning. Their silence said more than words could say. They found common ground in a simple glance, a fleeting touch, or a silence that required no explanation. For Lamar, these moments became an oasis in the desert of his urban life. They filled his heart with a feeling that he had long lost, a sense of warmth and joy from simple things. Ida remained for him like an unknown island, alluring and dangerous at the same time. He knew that every touch of her world made him sink deeper into a feeling he couldn't control. He knew that her presence revealed to him something about himself that he had not known before. And even though this attraction seemed wrong and contradictory to him, he could no longer just ignore it. The relationship between Lamar and Ida took on that subtle shade that distinguishes friendship from something much deeper and more personal. Hiding their attraction, they found ways to spend time together, as if meeting by chance in their grandmother's garden or unplanned, bumping into each other at a local park. These meetings were secret, but every moment spent together turned into an invaluable memory for them. At first it was casual glances, timid touches and light touches. Lamar felt like he was on the verge between reality and something unattainable. It seemed that he was still the same urban dweller who had come to his grandmother only for a short time, but at the same time his whole being was filled with a new strength, a new feeling that could neither be explained nor controlled. He came closer each time, and although both understood that these feelings were wrong from the point of view of society, this did not stop them. Every morning he looked for her in the garden, where she was walking or tending flowers. Lamar froze when he saw her among the bright flower beds and green foliage, as if she were a part of nature itself, this earth and these flowers. He stayed at a distance, watching as her hands carefully picked through the flower stalks, with what care and tenderness she tended each plant. Her movements were so natural and beautiful that Lamar couldn't look away without feeling guilty for his obsessive attachment. Over time, they began to meet more often, although they never talked about it openly. They didn't discuss their feelings, they didn't make promises, but there was always this hidden connection in their relationship. Lamar tried to stay calm and not betray his emotions, but every touch, every look they exchanged was full of a secret meaning that both brought them closer and at the same time kept them on the edge. These were moments that required silence from them, but the silence between them became a space for something more than words. One evening, after a particularly hot day, they met on the embankment of a local park, where the air was cool and the sky was beginning to turn dark shades before nightfall. Lamar walked over to Ida, and his heart began to beat so hard, as if it was about to burst out of his chest. They stood side by side, watching the water, which was gently swaying in a light breeze. It seemed that the world around them had quieted down, leaving them alone with their own thoughts and feelings. Lamar felt that he was attracted to her by something inexplicable, that every moment with her made him forget about the outside world. They began to meet at this place often, choosing evening hours when the park was empty and became their personal hideout. Ida, always calm and confident, also seemed to change at such moments. She was getting softer, and Lamar felt that there was something deep, unsolved in her eyes. He knew that their attraction to each other was growing every day, but they both tried to hold on without breaking the invisible line that protected them from something irreversible. Gradually, their meetings became more personal, filled with tenderness and awe. Sometimes, when they were walking in the evening park, Lamar dared to hold her hand, and she allowed it, as if acknowledging that resistance was no longer possible. These moments became a consolation for them when the whole world seemed distant and alien. They silently enjoyed each other, as if they were afraid to wake up this dream, where only the two of them existed, without condemnation and restrictions. Over time, Lamar began to realize that their relationship was not just a casual affair, but something that could change his whole life. Ida became for him a kind of secret refuge, where he found peace and joy that he could not find in his usual life. He felt that he was becoming more attached to her every day, and this feeling grew, despite all his efforts to hold on. At the same time, he understood that every evening, every meeting they had brought closer the moment when they would have to face reality. The time spent with Ida gave him new feelings and knowledge about himself. Lamar felt alive and fulfilled, but he couldn't help but realize that his feelings for her were forbidden fruit. He knew that this affair, despite its strength, required secrecy, and that they both had to keep this secret. But deep down, he knew that he was hiding something important from himself, which could eventually destroy everything he was used to. Ida, always calm and confident, also began to show tenderness, which Lamar felt was something new for her. He did not know what this caution of hers was connected with, but he saw in her eyes the depth of feelings that she hid behind her outward calmness. Her gaze at him was full of warmth, and every time he caught her doing it, his heart skipped a beat. Lamar understood that she, like him, was on the verge of succumbing to these feelings or giving up on them. She, like him, was struggling with herself. These evenings in the park, where they could be alone, did not become just a habit, it was something more. Lamar and Ida began to find in each other not only understanding and comfort, but also something like a joint shelter from the world where they both had to play their roles. Here, in a quiet park under the starry sky, they could afford to be themselves, forgetting for a while about all the limitations and fears. Lamar was making sure every day that he felt real around her. The mystery of their relationship has become their special ritual. Every evening they return to this secluded place, as if to their sacred vows. Lamar knew that his attraction to Ida was not just a hobby, it was a new, unknown world, full of warmth, which he had not experienced for a long time. He did not know where this connection would lead him, but he could not stop, could not give up what filled his life with a new meaning. Ida remained to him a kind of mystical spirit capable of giving him a sense of peace and joy. She was opening up a world to him that he hadn't known before, and Lamar was ready to follow her, even if it meant that one day they would have to pay dearly for it. As time went on, Lamar and Ida's secret romance seemed to have a life of its own, separate from the rest of the world. They enjoyed every moment they spent together and found solace in doing it in secret. But as their affection grew stronger, the shadow of reality began to hang over their meetings. Both Lamar and Ida began to realize that their feelings could not be indefinitely hidden, and that sooner or later their romance would go beyond their small world, where they could be themselves. Lamar's anxious thoughts began to torment him first. He increasingly wondered how his grandmother would react and how his feelings for her friend would be perceived. Estelle was one of the closest people to him, the unshakable support that had stood behind him since childhood. He knew that his grandmother was full of love and wisdom, but still he could not doubt that she would understand him in this difficult matter. After all, Ida is more than just a friend for Estella, she is a part of her life, the life that her grandmother has long considered settled and stable. Lamar couldn't help but think about how other people would perceive his relationship with Ida. He grew up in an environment where age-dictated boundaries were perceived as a natural framework. And although his heart told him that a real connection does not know such limitations, his mind convinced him otherwise. Every time he returned to his grandmother's house after secret meetings with Ada, he felt anxious, as if two different people were fighting in him. One said that their love was something pure and true, and the other warned of the inevitable consequences. This conflict was tearing him apart, making him doubt whether he was doing the right thing. Ida also couldn't help but realize the complexity of the situation. Despite her outward confidence, she felt the growing pressure of responsibility for their feelings. She was much older than Lamar, and her experience suggested that such affairs rarely end peacefully. She understood that Lamar still had his whole life ahead of him, full of opportunities and meetings, and it hurt her to realize that their relationship could deprive him of some of these opportunities. Her heart was drawn to him, but her mind coldly reminded her that their relationship in the eyes of society would be perceived as something inappropriate, to say the least. These thoughts began to torment them both. They began to ask themselves questions that they had previously tried to avoid. Lamar wondered if he could be happy in a relationship that should remain a secret. He could feel the guilt gradually overshadowing his joy. The doubts that he had initially dismissed were now seeping into his mind, filling his days and nights with uncertainty and anxiety. He understood that their affair was not just a matter of two people. It was something that could be painful not only for them, but also for their loved ones. Ida began to withdraw into herself more and more often, closing herself off from Lamar. She could no longer enjoy their meetings as much as before, because she knew that each new meeting only worsens their affection. She couldn't stop thinking that one day this affair would turn into disappointment and suffering. She was not at the age to allow herself to lose herself in feelings, and she was well aware that their relationship was a risk for both. Her heart told her one thing, but life experience and caring for Lamar made her pull away, no matter how hard it was. Gradually, their romance began to change. If before they had found joy and peace in every look, in every touch, now their meetings were full of tension. Lamar noticed that Ida was getting colder, tried to keep her distance and avoided his gaze. He tried to understand her feelings, tried to find answers to his questions, but he couldn't ignore the fact that she was also starting to distance herself. He was afraid of losing her, but he didn't know how to regain the lightness they had experienced in the beginning. An uneasy feeling was growing in Ida's heart as well. She understood that their affection had gone too far, that both of them would no longer be able to easily break off this relationship without pain and loss. She fought with herself, trying to suppress her feelings and regain control of the situation, but every time she saw Lamar, her heart started beating faster again. She was gripped by the fear that their romance, despite all the strength of their feelings, was doomed to break up. She couldn't afford to hope for a future with him, but it was almost impossible to break that bond either. Lamar and Ida began to avoid topics related to their feelings, trying to focus on simple moments, as before. But the tension between them only grew. They knew that this relationship had become more than just a hobby for both of them. The difficulties and doubts they experienced increasingly came into their lives, poisoning every moment they could have spent happy and serene. They both understood that there was a shadow of prohibition between them that could not be ignored. And doubts became their constant companions. Lamar began to wonder what he was willing to do for this love, how far he was willing to go, and whether it would be too much of a burden for him. He loved Ida, but increasingly realized that this feeling was associated with pain and difficulties that he might not be able to withstand. Every time he tried to drown out these thoughts, they came back, getting stronger every day. Ida was tormented by the realization that her feelings for Lamar had become a burden to him. She saw how he was suffering from internal conflict and felt that she had no right to impose her feelings on him. Her heart was breaking because despite all the doubts, she knew that her affection for Lamar was not superficial. However, she was increasingly coming to the conclusion that perhaps the best way out for both of them was to break off this relationship, even if it hurt her. Doubts became an insalable barrier for them, and every next day brought new questions. They both knew that the moment was approaching when they would have to make a choice that would determine their fate. Lamar and Ida knew that their feelings could not remain a secret forever, that sooner or later their romance would become a reality for those around them, and they would have to accept it. The past weeks have been a real emotional ordeal for Lamar. He realized that his feelings with Ida were doomed to struggle with their own fears, social views, and anxiety for the future. His soul was tormented by the realization that their secret romance, which they cherished so much, would inevitably take shape beyond the boundaries of their secluded world. Each of their dates seemed like a breath of fresh air to him, but these moments were invariably followed by a feeling of guilt and fear that one day he would have to reveal everything. In the evenings, after he left Ida and returned to his grandmother, Lamar could not find peace. His mind was filled with thoughts about how difficult it would be to admit everything to his grandmother, how her reaction would change not only his relationship with her, but also with himself. He knew that maybe her attitude towards him would never be the same if she found out the truth. However, he could no longer continue to live in the shadows. Every look he took at Ida, every breath he took next to her, became a confirmation that she was his only real connection with himself, and it became simply unbearable to hide it. Ida herself also felt the inevitability of the coming decision. With every meeting, with every moment when they could be sincere with each other, she realized that their affection had become so strong that it was no longer possible to remain in the shadows. Ida saw Lamar suffer from remorse and fear, realizing that each of their dates, although full of happiness, also becomes a cause for alarm. She began to realize that they needed to find a way to open up to someone who was so important to Lamar. Every evening when they said goodbye and returned to their solitary rooms, they could not get rid of the feeling that their love should no longer be enclosed within a mystery. The autumn evening brought cold, humid air, and Lamar, wrapped in a warm blanket, sat thoughtfully on the porch of his grandmother's house, gathering his courage. He knew that this conversation would change his life. His heart was pounding like never before, filled with both fear and hope. He looked at the landscape in front of the house, covered with a light autumn mist, and felt that this scene somehow symbolized his inner state, the fog of uncertainty covering his future and past, receding only when he could look at it all with clarity and honesty. Ida joined him, feeling that this moment would require all their courage and honesty. They were silent, standing side by side, both lost in their own thoughts, knowing that the decision could not wait any longer. Lamar and Ida decided that they would be together, that they would take the risk and open up to their grandmother, despite all their fears. Grandma was not just a family person for Lamar, she personified for him everything that warmth, support and family meant, and her acceptance or rejection of this acceptance could be fateful for him. When they entered the house, the warm light of the lamps filled the rooms, as if the house itself understood that something important was about to happen. Grandma Estelle was setting the table, as always. She greeted Lamar with the same affectionate smile, but Lamar understood that after today, this smile may never be so serene. However, he also knew that being honest with her was the only way for his and Ada's feelings to have a right to exist. Estelle noticed his serious gaze and Ida's smile, so rare lately. She felt that her grandson had come to her with something that was important for him to share. After looking at them, she invited them to the table. They sat down, and Lamar realized that this was probably the most crucial moment of his life. He knew that his every word would be carefully listened to, that her reaction would not be superficial. Grandma had always been a person who perceives everything with deep understanding and feeling. But he also knew that the topic he was going to bring up could have a big impact on their relationship. Lamar took a deep breath, trying to collect his thoughts. His voice was calm, but everything inside him was trembling with tension. He began the story, starting with how he met Ida and how their relationship developed. He openly shared what he felt, talking about his inner conflict, about the affection that turned out to be unexpected for himself. There was sincerity in every sentence, and Estelle seemed to understand that her grandson wasn't just talking out of guilt or fear. She did not see a child in front of her, but a man who was faced with a feeling far beyond his ability to resist. Lamar revealed everything to his grandmother. He did not hide that Ida had become for him not just a woman, but someone who awakened in him the desire to be real, not to hide behind masks and not succumb to the usual norms. He talked about how sincerely he admires Ida, how her calmness and wisdom have become a support for him, and how he can no longer continue to hide it, because for him she is more than just a family friend. There was sincere pain and awe in his words. He did not hide his love or his fears in front of his grandmother, allowing her to see him as he really is. Estella was silent, listening to him to the end. In her gaze, Lamar saw how she weighed everything he said, how her face was covered with deep lines of thought. She knew that this conversation was not just an emotional moment, but a key turn in her grandson's life, perhaps a turn that would determine what kind of person he would become. She also understood that her own reaction would be a decision for Lamar that would either support him or become a source of enduring pain. Several weary minutes passed, during which Lamar experienced all shades of despair and hope. He knew that her answer would be the last frontier for him, beyond which either the long-awaited acceptance would come, or he would have to face loneliness and rejection. Estelle continued to stare at him in silence, and each of her looks seemed to reveal to him her heart filled with wisdom, love, and life experience. When Grandma finally made her choice, there was no condemnation or detachment in her eyes. There was only a soft, understanding light in it, which Lamar will always remember. She nodded softly at him, accepting his feelings, his choices, his life as it had become. Lamar felt a relief that could not be expressed in words. At that moment he realized that he had gained not only the support of his grandmother, but also the permission to be himself without fear and guilt. It was the answer that freed his soul and heart. Ida felt it too. She saw in this nod of her grandmother's acceptance and her own release from the fear that their relationship would burden Lamar. They both found in this acceptance the peace they had been missing for so long, and the realization that their love had a right to exist.